He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, Matthew?
Hey, welcome back for Season 2, Episode 43 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, everyone's fantasy football seasons ended, no matter what league you're playing in, as the dreaded Week 18 put managers in shambles. I shared a final round of tips to help you prepare on Fantasy Football Friday, but if your roster wasn't already loaded, then you might have been toast with all those game scripts. Then Trayvon and Stephon Diggs had one of the worst weeks that a pair of brothers has ever seen in sports. And the Los Angeles Angels finally devised a way to move on from a player with some of the worst contract value of all time, noted lover of baseball, Anthony Rendon. And this week, it's time for our Fantasy Football Friday retrospective and to put it to bed for the year. Now, I mean it. This is the last Fantasy Football Friday for the 2025-6 season. Of course, I'm still going to be dialed in for the playoffs and have predictions and stuff going forward. But I will not get back into fantasy beyond this until pre-draft rankings next year, so enjoy the last one for all you've got. First things first, sharing my results. I played 2 full PPR or point per reception leagues, one of 10 players, one of 9. I brought home 1 championship and 1 second place. And here are the lineups I brought into Week 18. On the championship winning team, Trevor Lawrence, Christian McCaffrey, Rico Dowdle, Puka Nacua, Luther Burden III, Michael Mayer, Jaden Blue, Texans defense, and Brandon Aubrey. I was always more happy with my draft in that league than in the other lineup. Being able to get McCaffrey and Puka back-to-back with the snake draft at 10 and 11, the value there was nuts. Then there was the lineup that let me down dramatically on the final weekend to the tune of 61 points, by far the lowest scoring week of my life. Brock Purdy, James Cook, Jaden Blue again, CeeDee Lamb, Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer again, Luther Burden again, Rams defense, and Mr. K1 himself, Jason Myers. Fun fact, my projection for the week wasn't very high. It was about 123, but that second lineup actually scored under half of that projection. And was this ever as good of a team on paper, even on draft night? No, but it wasn't supposed to be that pitiful when it mattered. My combined record across both leagues was not nearly where it should have been, as I definitely mismanaged some things early on. I went 6-6 and 9-5 for, was that 15 and 11 combined? Not a number to write home about, especially for someone that takes fantasy pretty seriously and always, makes the most number of roster moves. Here are some of the good surprises from that season before we get into the bad. I got James Cook in the 5th round, and he finished as RB6 in PPR. Plus, did you hear he beat out Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry for the rushing title? It's always been so evident that he had all the ability to do that. And then you combine that with looking at the carries from last year to this year. The Bills gave him 102 more carries, or an average of 6 more a game, and so he had all the opportunity. Having the top scoring kicker Jason Myers and number 2 scoring kicker Brandon Aubrey, that helped. It helped to buoy you at times when some of your other skill guys were not so hot. Brock Purdy was my quasi-starter when I could have him. In those games, he was 6th among quarterbacks at 19.7 points a game. If you take away the 5-point game in Week 17 against the Seahawks, which basically doomed me to a second-place finish all on its own, he would have averaged 21.5, and he would have even beat out Josh Allen as QB1 per game. And I made starting tight end picks that I'm really happy with, if you don't count Brock Bowers missing 5 games with the Raiders. Bowers tied George Kittle and the Packers' Tucker Kraft, of all people, for 2nd in PPR points per game at the position from the 27th slot I drafted him at. Then Tyler Warren was a championship roster piece, even if he petered out the same way that the rest of the Colts roster did late in the year. He's still a rookie, and he still had as many catches as Travis Kelce, more yards than Bowers or Kittle, and he was 4th in points scored overall at the position. It's going to take a while, but when the Colts have fixed themselves, when they've found their identity, and hopefully re-signed Daniel Jones, Warren is going to be a perennial top 5 fantasy option at tight end. Now, I was in no way perfect as a player, and here's a few of the things I just botched. It always starts on draft night, but most of the big mistakes can only be seen or felt in hindsight. In the championship winning lineup, I drafted Jaden Daniels with my 3rd pick at 30th overall. That would normally be high to take a, non-Josh Allen, Mahomes, or Jalen Hurts kind of quarterback. You can definitely wait longer and get better value. Then Daniels played less than 7 whole games, and although he was good in that time, the other playmakers or even quarterback options I could have had with that draft capital still make me wonder if I could have turned 9 and 5 into something better. In my 2nd place lineup, I dropped both Patriots running backs to waivers after draft day, and both of them became great flex options each week because of how big an improvement that team made offensively. Those guys are Ramondre Stevenson, the 5-year vet, and Travion Henderson, the rookie. I just presumed that I would have to pick, blindly between them each week for who would be the feature back. Henderson was RB20, Stevenson was RB25, and even though I did hit on Devon Achane and James Cook as my top running backs, the depth that I needed was already on my bench, and I went looking for lottery tickets. CeeDee Lamb was my worst overdraft by leaps and bounds, but I really struggle to fault myself for picking him at 9. How does 6 catches for 50 yards total sound in the last 2 weeks, though? You're playing for a championship, and then the Cowboys do what the Cowboys do. That made me salty, but the bigger issue is George Pickens might be the Cowboys' better option now. It's telling that this is considered a very down year for CD, but he still had 75 catches for 1,077 yards. Now, only 3 touchdowns while he was being drafted 5th overall on average, and he was the 2nd highest average drafted receiver after Jamar Chase. That means in front of Justin Jefferson or Puka Nacua. George Pickens, on the other hand, would be drafted at about wide receiver 29 and finish wide receiver 5, as opposed to CD, again, being drafted wide receiver 2 and finishing wide receiver 22. It's going to be a much harder decision who the Cowboys' number 1 is next year and how you manage that in fantasy. And Jaguars receiver Brian Thomas Jr. deserves one more dishonorable mention, dare I say, for being maybe the most disappointing player in all of fantasy this year. From wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 42 in the same scheme with a healthy career year from Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, 10 dropped passes, tied for 2nd in the league, and he graded out 59th of 81 ranked receivers by Pro Football Focus. And for all of that, I took him 28th overall in the 3rd round. And that was all just around drafting. There's a whole lot more that goes into it, of course. Like everybody else, I made incorrect sit and start decisions, probably every single week. I would overthink defenses. I would kind of waste roster spots on rather unimportant things, like backup tight ends. There's just no chance with the tight ends this year. If you didn't draft, a really high caliber tight end 1, forget about it. I would even sometimes roster a second defense. I would trust names over numbers, guys like Aaron Jones and DK Metcalf. And despite it all, it was my best year in fantasy by leaps and bounds. Everyone I'm playing with is my friend, which helped. And each year you play is just another year of experience to add to your knowledge base. I've given you as many tips and tricks as I know for now, but those fit the state of the league from this year, and just know that shifts every single year. I'm not going to be solely a fantasy guy at any point on the show, but it would be hard to say that I shouldn't cover at least something fantasy-wise for every week when we are in NFL season. For the 2025-26 fantasy season, Fantasy Football Friday bids you adieu. Up next, the Atlanta Hawks are the newest NBA team to trade a young face of the franchise. Luka Doncic was a bigger story last year because the return package included Anthony Davis. But Trae Young to the Washington Wizards is still a significant shift in the landscape. Trae is 27 years old, a 4-time All-Star in year 8. The specifics are super tame compared to what we've come to expect from a trade for a big star. CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert are heading to Atlanta. McCollum is 34, Kispert is 26, and if you just kind of mash their stat lines together, then you'd come pretty close to what Trae Young produces on his own. I really think Luka is one of the better player comparisons that you can make in terms of archetype here, combined with age, ability, and the thing people want to criticize most, his impact. Although Trae Young is a 25-point-per-game scorer for his career and averages 9.8 assists, 3rd most all time, he's not really considered in the top tier of current point guards. What does every other slim, defensively indifferent scorer do that he doesn't? Or at least the top guys? Look, efficiency is not his strong suit with a career 35.1% mark shooting threes. You can live with that when he still lights up the scoreboard, but what does one make of shooting 43.2% from the field for his career? He's down there in LaMelo Ball territory, who I hear is now coming off the bench with the Hornets. That's crazy. Trae Young is on a max deal. I guess the Wizards should be relieved that it's not a supermax, but he has a player option for next year that'll cost them $49 million. Because his numbers don't always match his impact, and Young can lock in that $49 million anytime between now and the end of June, it's crucial to watch how he plays down the stretch for a Wizards team that's just not good. They sit at 10-26 as of this Thursday afternoon, and the trade went down on Wednesday. If Young doesn't exercise that player option, he goes right to free agency, and there's no guarantee he would get that same kind of money. The other edge of that sword being, if this Wizards team has him playing hero ball and he really inflates his stats, he's pumping out 30-point games and triple-doubles, then he might be one of the most expensive free agents in next year's class. As mentioned, the only guys to ever average more assists are Magic Johnson and John Stockton, and he's pretty quietly 12th all-time in points per game. This does feel a little Juan Soto-ish, although Soto is definitely better at baseball than Trae is at basketball, but I don't recall seeing it too often across other sports. NFL teams, if you're playing a position like quarterback at a high level and you've locked down that second contract, you're playing the entirety of that out where you were drafted. You would never intentionally request a trade from, for example, the Dolphins to the Jets if you were Tua, would you? And the Jets wouldn't take on his salary at, $50 million a year, would they? I want to find some more outlandish analogies across sports, but I think that's a good one for now. But the Wizards have their guy. Hope they're happy. This next segment is only tangentially going back to baseball, but it's going to have implications across all sports soon enough, don't you worry. I'm not certain how many times I've touched on regional sports networks or RSNs on the show, but a handful. As of this Thursday, 9 MLB teams have ended their contract with Main Street Sports Group, a range of regional channels that were previously known as Fox Sports and Bally Sports networks. FanDuel Sports Network is the current name as betting continues to creep into the everyday chatter. The fallout is that there's now uncertainty around just who is going to carry the games of these 9 teams, and more importantly to fans like you and me, hey, what's it going to cost? The list of teams that are axing FanDuel Sports, at least for now: the Braves, Reds, Royals, Tigers, Angels, Marlins, Brewers, Cardinals, and Rays. Technically, they could all come to some new terms, and not much would change on the consumer's end. But what's seemingly more likely is that a third party comes in as a buyer, changes the name, and repackages all the rights somehow. These FanDuel networks don't just carry the MLB, they have broadcast rights for 29 different pro sports teams right now, and a number of those teams have gone unpaid under the terms of their contracts. There is a little grace period, I think, of 2 weeks that Main Street enters when they miss a payment, but you don't want to do that too often. And this group went from their bankruptcy filing in January 2025 right back there in the course of an almost perfect calendar year, so all their writing's on the wall. The MLB itself is still standing on guard, ready to take over the broadcast for any team that needs it. The league currently controls the broadcast for the Twins, Mariners, Padres, Guardians, and Rockies, with the Nationals set to come in for this year. There is probably nothing that's going to stop the wave, and just about every team in the 4 major sports is going to have to fall under that national umbrella eventually. Let's shimmy on along to the NFL's Black Monday. It's the day of the year everyone in the front office and on the coaching staff have to be on highest alert. It's the Monday after the final regular season game and before wildcard weekends. It's taken a few days for some more firings to roll in, but at the time of recording, the Dolphins' Mike McDaniel is the latest casualty. Who would have guessed that 4 years with no playoff wins and shoes with the security tags left on would be enough to get a great offensive mind canned? You wouldn't have really known that McDaniel had any experience coaching offense by the Dolphins' offensive numbers this year. The list of all the dismissed coaches so far reads like this. The whale at the top is John Harbaugh. 18 years in with the Ravens, more successful in the sport than probably any other current coach but Andy Reid or Mike Tomlin, and then boom, you miss the playoffs and you're out. Brutal. The Raiders' Pete Carroll, the oldest coach in the league, but look, he led them to the #1 draft pick, so what gives? I mean, they're winning by losing. The Cardinals' Jonathan Gannon, that guy's kind of a dweeb. The Browns' Kevin Stefanski. The Falcons' Raheem Morris. Again, Mike McDaniel in Miami. And the other 2 open jobs were mid-season firings, Brian Daboll with the Giants and Brian Callahan with the Titans. It's pretty obvious what the best job opening is, right? I'm pretty certain it has to be the Ravens. Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback out of all these teams and the only one with 1 MVP, let alone 2. But I think that's the boring option. So let me pitch the idea that the best opening is actually the Giants. Cam Scatterboo and Jackson Dart were such a fun rookie duo while they were both healthy and starting, short as that time was. Brian Burns was their huge free agent signing 2 years ago. Edge rushers for 30-plus mil. They better be impactful. And this guy had 16.5 sacks this year, second only to Myles Garrett. Quick shout out to Myles Garrett, by the way, setting the single-season sack record with 23. And no, I don't think Joe Burrow took a dive to give it to him. I've watched that play, and I think it's just one of the best pass rush get-offs I've ever seen. With the Giants, though, they need help in the secondary, and they were a disastrous 31st in run defense. Even with the good players that they have up there, Dexter Lawrence in the middle, Brian Burns, and 3rd overall pick Abdul Carter, those guys were all playing at a high level along their front 7. Everybody else needs a lot of help. But you get Malik Neighbors back if he's all recovered from that ACL tear, and he's probably going to instantly be a top 10 receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson, as their number 2, had his first 1,000-yard receiving season. You let Dart play, run, and shoot, and you open up the playbook a little bit. You retain one of those veteran QBs between Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson to mentor Dart or step in there if he really struggles. And you keep a good balanced run game going with Scatterboo, Tyrone Tracy, even Devin Singletary out of the backfield. They all mix in and they have some unique skill sets. I see this as a chance for a real worst-to-first run under John Harbaugh if they hit the draft heavy on defense. The worst job still appears to be sort of a toss-up between the Titans and Raiders. There is not a lot of NFL talent on either side, but I guess I'd have to give the edge to the Raiders if they're healthy. They were missing Max Crosby, Geno Smith, and Brock Bowers at the end of the year, and that made Vegas just bad enough to hold on to that #1 pick, even though they beat the Chiefs in Week 18. It sounded fake to me when I looked this up, but the Raiders have not drafted a quarterback in the first round since Jamarcus Russell in 2007, and we all know how that turned out. They have no choice but to do so this year. I mean, you could have said that for really quite a while, ever since Derek Carr departed for sure, but I also won't be surprised when they sort of inevitably go with offensive line. The only concern with any coach going to either of those spots, the Titans or Raiders, is if they're going to be one and done when they inevitably don't create a big turnaround and win a bunch of games in year 1. But it's a business, and the name of the game is to win. All this to say, there are going to be a couple of coaches from this cycle that step right into another head coaching job next year, and I expect some of them will be hired before the Super Bowl. Because why wait if you know who you want? We're at 8 head coach openings currently, and recent history shows that 7 to 8 is roughly average, with the largest recent number recorded being 9 in 2022, per the list I'll link for you here from SB Nation. Yes, for the record, I think Harbaugh is the best coach available, and no, I don't think he deserved to be fired. Almost everyone else on the list kind of undeniably did, even as there's clearly more mediocrity tolerated in the league now. That fact continues to slap us in the face. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this very last point because it really irks me and makes me sad. But the Tigers and Tarek Skubal seem to be drifting further and further away. Skubal is arbitration eligible. He puts in a $32 million salary, which would be by far the all-time record. David Price previously holding that title at $19.7 million for a pre-arbitration player. The Tigers counter with $19 million of their own below the record, and not that David Price wasn't a great pitcher himself, but Skubal's on a whole nother level, and they're this far apart before the season has started when he's not yet a free agent. There is a serious rift, a serious disconnect between those sides, and when it goes to arbitration, I mean, you got to figure that, okay, a judge is going to pick Skubal's number because that's how it works. You only get to pick between those two And could you imagine what he's still going to fetch on the open market and how that number is going to continue to increase if he throws once more like a Cy Young winner for this coming year? Where all of this reluctance to pay maybe the best pitcher on earth still is coming from, it's just anybody's guess. But there is now a serious possibility that another team might start putting together another trade package before the season starts and flop him by spring training. And that will do us. Thanks for coming back week after week, or if you're relatively new here, as always, we're happy to have you. Either way, check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, @The Voice of Tanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, and the YouTube channel is the whole thing spelled out with spaces. Connect on LinkedIn, leave a like, comment, and share. Catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 43 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you?